Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and I'm joined today by a good friend of mine, actually from graduate school. I'm joined by Dr. Derek Griner, who is a psychologist, an associate training director, and clinical professor at Brigham Young University's counseling psychology program. He's the co-author of a book and workbook on compassion-focused therapy, and we're going to be talking about compassion all day today. Welcome to the show, Derek.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. You know, you are the reason I survived grad school.
You're the reason I made it through too, right? I think we kind of saved each other, maybe.
Yeah, you're the reason I survived grad school. So it's good to get to collaborate on something as grown-ups now. So, no, a lot of fun. Thank you for being here. So, I feel, I tweeted out earlier today that my afternoon is going to a course on finding purpose in life and then talking about compassion. It's a pretty good gig. Pretty good gig, the stuff we get to talk about. But I'm curious, why compassion? What is it about compassion, and what sort of led you to this work?
Yeah, I think, as you know, we went to graduate school together, and it's a psychology program, and there's so many different ways of viewing human development and human thriving and surviving. And there's a lot of really interesting theories out there about how people can grow and improve. And in 2016, I had this really fortunate opportunity to meet with Dr. Paul Gilbert. He's the founder of compassion-focused therapy. And when I met with them, it just really aligned with the way that I wanted to work with people. It's an approach that has a biopsychosocial component. And so we're taking into account the biology of people, the way that they were raised, how is their mental well-being. All of that matters. And I think one of the things that I really love about this approach to therapy, and really maybe even the approach to life, is that it has a sensitivity to multicultural aspects. And that's something that I've done a lot of research in the past. That was my dissertation. And I just like the idea that, sometimes people want to say we're all in the same boat. That's not the case. We're not all in the same boat. But when it comes to compassion and suffering, that is something that everybody in this life goes through. If you have any of your listeners that have gone through life without any suffering, will you have them contact me? I want to write a book together and make millions off of their non-suffering life.
There's this Russian saying, Russians are always good for sayings like this. And it's something to the effect of, if you wake up and feel no pain, you've died, sort of thing. So this is sort of the way of life, right? The way of life is difficulty, and we're all doing our best and kind of slogging through. But I like what you said, is it sort of one tool or one skill set that has a multitude of applications across cultural contexts and indeed across professional context. I mean, you're a counselor, you're a professor. I sold my soul to Wall Street, but I do. When I read your book, I immediately thought there's a ton here that would benefit my listeners and the advisors that I work with every day. So Derek, a word like compassion, we all know what it means, at least at sort of a colloquial or a surface level. But I feel like sometimes the too common use of a word like compassion can sometimes obscure its larger or more significant meaning. So when you and clinicians like you talk about compassion, what are you talking about, and how might it differ from the popular conception of compassion?
Well, I really I appreciate that question a lot, because I think compassion gets I don't know. I think it gets the rap that it's soft or that it's weak or that it's like it's just being nice or like it's feeling sorry for yourself or somebody else. Some of you will be old enough to remember Saturday Night Live Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy. One of his deep thoughts is the first thing is I learned to forgive myself. Then I said, go ahead, do whatever you want. It's okay by me. That's not compassion, right?
I guess I was thinking of I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and God, that's a different.
Well, that's Stuart Smalley, right? And he's on to something there. But I do think that like compassion isn't weak, it's not submissive. The way that we think about compassion is that it's action oriented. It's dedicated to helping other people and it's dedicated to actually helping ourselves. And when I talked about suffering earlier, suffering is like that's the foundation of compassion. If I can like, is it okay if I have like I guess just the listeners try something for 1 second here?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. I guess I just want you to think for just a moment. Okay, like and I'll give you a timer, right? I'll time it. But I want you for 30 seconds to really think about somebody that you care about. Think about somebody that you love, that you care about, and think about a time that you saw them suffering, that they were in pain or they were hurting in some way. And I don't want you to focus so much on like the actual event that was causing them pain, but I want you to just think and notice what happens inside of you as you think about the pain that you saw them experience. And like I said, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. So for 30 seconds, just think about that person. And I'm going to invite you, Daniel, but I'll also like the listeners, like what did you notice? Who did you think of and what did you notice there?
Yeah, well, I thought of my wife, right? And I won't go into it in too much detail, but I thought of my wife, right? And a tough time that she was experiencing. And yeah, that's where my mind went.
And what did you notice like happening in terms of like your thoughts and kind of feelings and any motivations that you noticed maybe?
Yeah, it was a desire to help her, a level of frustration at not being able to take away some of the harder parts of that situation, right? Frustration at not being able to fix it or make it right or to make it go away was another sort of pronounced feeling I had.
Yeah, and so like you're really hitting on the definition that we use for compassion, where it's a sensitivity to the suffering and the distress in ourselves, and that's important, ourselves and others, with the motivation to try to prevent or alleviate the pain that we're seeing. And a lot of times when we see pain and suffering, it's painful for us. And so a lot of times, like actually staying with compassion is difficult because it's painful. And our definition of compassion is that you're willing to stay with whatever it is that you're feeling. We're not trying to get rid of feelings with compassion. We're trying to be in suffering and work through suffering as opposed to avoiding or getting around it somehow.
Yeah. So it's a two-parter then, right? So you help me out if I missed it, but the first part is almost like empathy, right? So trying to understand your pain or their pain. Because I do think one of the things that I loved about the book, it's interesting when I pick up a book about compassion, my immediate thought is, how can I be compassionate towards other people? And there's a great deal in the book about about self-compassion. and I wasn't expecting that, which is an interesting commentary, all its own. But yeah, so it's a two-parter, trying to empathize with and then trying to prevent suffering. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's not just, it's action oriented, like you're saying. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. But we may get down a rabbit hole here. But I'm thinking back to my wife's suffering, right?
Yeah.
And I liked what you said about a willingness to sit in that pain, because I think we often conflate compassion with something like sympathy.
There you go.
Sympathy can be sort of dismissive or kind of fleeting. Compassion, it sounds like, is more enduring. But, insofar as part of compassion is trying to alleviate someone's suffering, I think our attempts at alleviating suffering can sometimes be in and of themselves dismissive, right? It's like,
Sure.
It's like, oh, let me fix this. Let me make it go away. So how do we balance the very natural desire to want to end someone else's suffering with not falling into the trap of trying to fix everything or go directly to solutions when all they need is a listening ear or a friend or a shoulder to cry on or someone to sit with them?
Yeah, I really like that a lot. And it reminds me of an experience that I had. Our second daughter, when we found out her diagnosis was Down syndrome, it was really interesting to see the responses that people had. I remember one really good friend, their immediate response was, "Oh no, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
And I know that he was trying to be supportive. I know that he was trying to help me out. And I think that if we can remind ourselves that we don't need to have answers, I would much rather him have said something along the lines of, "I don't know what to say. I love you. I know that I care about you." Like sometimes that's going to be enough. Or even asking the person, "What would you like right now?
Yeah.
Do you want a solution? Do you want me to be with you?" And then being willing to shift and recognize that, oh man, this might be painful for me to sit with this person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why we oftentimes go towards solutions, is we're trying to learn. I think as humans, like, it's a skill to learn to sit with the pain and the reactions that we have to pain that we see.
When I think about the scenario I imagined with my wife and me wanting to resolve that pain in her life, portion of that is altruistic, right? A portion of that is because I love her and I want her to live as pain-free an existence as is humanly possible. But then part of it, if I'm honest, is annoyance, right? I mean, I will say the specific thing I was thinking of was sort of not life and death. And it's like, yeah, we've been talking about this for many days now, and I've been trying to help, and I feel like I'm not helping, and I really would love to talk about something else, right? Sort of family contention sort of thing. And, again, not life or death. Hopefully it'd be a little bit more sensitive in that case. But yeah, part of it is me genuinely going, yeah, I want you to feel better. And hopefully that's even most of it. But you have to be honest that part of it is like, look, this is uncomfortable. Like, I just want this to go away. And like you said with your friend finding out about, you having a daughter with special needs, you go, it's probably a little uncomfortable for him. He doesn't know what to say. And it's like, what can I say that's going to get me out of here?
I mean, like Hallmark has all kinds of cards for funerals, right? Because they're trying to find the right thing to say, where oftentimes there isn't the right thing to say. And I think that when, it's hard to have compassion when you have the answer already. Mm-hmm. Or if you see somebody suffering and you're like, do this and it would fix it, and the person doesn't do that, it's hard to watch somebody continue to suffer, and it's kind of annoying. It can be.
Yeah.
And it's a practice to get more patient with it, I think.
For sure.
I'm guessing in your field, especially, right? Like some financial advisor meets a guy like me and they're like, oh my gosh, like invest, just
Right.
do it, right? This will help you.
Well, I'm thinking about advisors because so many times it's an interesting reality of the work that I do that advisors are brought into close contact with their clients, oftentimes during life transitions, right? There's a divorce, money is changing hands. There's a death, money is changing hands. There's a child with an addiction that needs inpatient treatment. We need some money. I mean, there's sort of all these really heavy life scenarios that all have a financial substrate. And so I think this is great advice for the advisors that are listening to this. And I love the piece about how can I be helpful? Like, what is it that you need from me now, right?
Yeah.
You need a cash flow analysis. Like, is that all you want from me, right? Like, do you need a cash flow analysis? Do you need a financial plan that incorporates this sort of new life reality and it's that cut and dried? Or are we friends and you're coming to me now to be heard and to be empathized with? I really think that's a really thoughtful way to say, hey, there's a number of ways we can take this. How can I best support you right now? I want to run with what I found to be one of the most empowering and sort of counterintuitive pieces of that definition was this idea that it's not always about softness or kindness, right? And this is something we've tried to teach our kids, right? Because we'll read things as a family that talk about the merits of meekness, and we say, hey, like this meekness is not passivity or being walked on or things like that. Sometimes being meek means standing up for yourself or for someone else. What are some situations where compassion might look assertive, firm, or even defiant?
Yeah, I love that question too. I think, like you said, I think a lot of us grow up in a culture of niceness and we say yes before we even think about whether or not we want to do that, or even whether or not it would be in our best interest.
Yeah.
I certainly remember times in graduate school, somebody might ask me to take them to the airport. Hey, like, I got to catch a flight. Can you take me? And I have a test the next day. And before even thinking about like my own suffering that would happen, I want to be nice to the other person and say yes. And so I take them to the airport and end up staying up until 3 or 4 in the morning doing my studying when I could have done that earlier. So I think it really takes practice being assertive and saying it's okay to consider my own needs. Compassion flows in 3 ways, like you've read about. Like we have compassion for others. A lot of us are really good at that. We practice that and we get really good. Receiving compassion from others, that's a little more tricky. And then having compassion for ourselves and putting in boundaries can be really hard. I was just meeting with a client earlier who was telling me about an abusive relationship that they were in and how in this relationship, their partner was telling them, you need to be there for me. You need to take care of me. You are being selfish. You're not kind. And this poor client was like really concerned that they weren't being kind, that they weren't there enough for the partner. And that's like, compassion doesn't mean that you allow somebody to walk all over you. It's almost, I mean, you've probably heard this analogy before, but if somebody had a hammer and they hit you on the head with it, you wouldn't stick around and let them keep hitting you. You would say like, I don't like that. Even if they said, well, Derek, it helps me feel better. You're not being nice if you don't let me hit you with the hammer. Like, please let me just hit you. You're going to say, no, put it down, right? Like put the hammer down and then we can talk. So I think this happens a lot in family situations where we're conditioned to do whatever family wants us to do. And it's actually okay to think about your own well-being as well as those around you. And that takes practice for people, I think.
So I'm going to ask you a question for which there's no clear-cut answer, but I go to your airport, drive someone to the airport example, which is the most annoying of all requests. And
Right.
that is a horrifying request.
Especially with Uber, right?
Yeah, right. No, so you go to something like that. I'm doing a lot of research right now on meaning and purpose in life, right? And one of the things that we find in the research is that not all meaning, not all purpose is created equal, and that other focused purpose, service, call it, right? Charitable acts, service, are sort of more impactful, more meaningful than sort of self-centered goals and self-centered purpose. So we have these two realities, right? Like on the one hand, we know from the research and just from our personal experience that helping others, being of assistance, being of use to others, being good to others is one of the sources of some of life's, greatest joys. And then on the other hand, we have this reality that if there's nothing left in your pitcher, you have nothing left to pour out, right? I mean, if you don't take some sort of care of yourself, you can be exhausted and taken advantage of. What sort of counsel or advice or heuristics do you use to know when we ought to be serving and showing compassion that way, and when we need to be self-compassionate and give ourselves a break?
Yeah, I think I think it really brings up the idea that compassion is contextual, and it actually requires us to slow down, which for a lot of us is tricky. A lot of us are on the go all the time, and we rarely slow down to take inventory as to how we're feeling and what our capacity actually is. So like in some circumstances, I don't know, sitting on a couch and eating chips at the end of the day and just watching a movie, that actually might be a really compassionate response. But in another instance, it might not be. Like it might be more compassionate for you to get done what you need to get done so that you won't be suffering tomorrow. If you've got a big presentation the next day, like taking like a mental health day and just eating chips is not going to be as helpful in alleviating suffering as working and getting done what it is that you have ahead of you.
It's a great point. One of the gripes that Dr. Naomi Wynn, we used to work with her at a counseling center. She works with me at Orion now, but Naomi and I, when we talk about self-care, so-called, as it exists today in sort of the popular mind, it's like cucumber slices on your eyes and a piece of cake and a massage or something, which is absolutely what the doctor, I mean, I love all those things. It's absolutely what the doctor ordered sometimes. And other times it's kicking your own butt and saying, wow, like I got to get something done because my taking it easy is not going to contribute to my long-term well-being. And I need to get to the gym or do that project I've been putting off or, call that relative I have a hard time talking to or, to take that friend to the airport. So I love that. There's no easy answers. It's contextual, right?
Yeah. And I think like just noticing if there's avoidance, if you're trying to get away from something, that's a pretty good indicator that it's not compassion.
Yeah.
As opposed to moving toward something. Like if you're moving toward alleviating suffering, that's a pretty good indicator.
Oh, that's there's the heuristic I was looking for, right? Am I moving toward something or away from something? I have always liked the idea of kind of picking a couple of words that will be kind of your mission statement for the year. And this year I have 3 words. One is meaning. I want to work with more purpose, and I also want to do a lot of research around that. The second one is community. I want to strengthen my relationships. And my third one is no, because I found I was just saying yes to too much stuff. And that just sort of reflexively, I would say yes to everything. And then, the delivery suffers, the quality of the work suffers. You become resentful of the thing you said yes to. And so look, I'm still going to say yes to plenty of things this year, but just having no be my word of the year, it puts a little bit of a circuit breaker between me and a request of my time that gives me, I think maybe that ability to be compassionate. So Derek, I want to jump into these 6 principles of compassion that are in your book. We don't have time for all 6. We're also trying to sell some books. So we're going to, with the first hit's free, right? We're going to give you, yeah, he's a compassion dealer. We're going to give you one bit of compassion. You have to go buy the other 5. So the one that I love the most out of these 6 is something that I've talked to myself and my children about before. And it's the idea that it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. I just think that's so good. Can you talk about where this idea that it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility comes from, and how we might apply it?
Yeah. The idea of it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility, it taps into wisdom that I hope that we develop as human beings. And that wisdom is we all have life circumstances that we did not choose. Mm-hmm. We all have genetics that we didn't, like my daughters didn't choose to have Down syndrome. I'm guessing that people out there don't wake up each day and say, I'm really going to work to be anxious today. That would be fantastic. Yeah. No, right? Like people have a genetic predisposition towards anxiety, depression, other mental health concerns. And a lot of times we get after ourselves and say, like, I'm a terrible person. Why am I doing this? Why am I not working harder? I need to get over this. As opposed to saying, this isn't my fault, but it is my responsibility to do something with it. An analogy that I love to use, and it's like, it's making more sense to me because this just happened. I got into a car accident that was not my fault, like 100% not my fault. And if I want my car to get fixed, it's my responsibility. Like nobody else is going to call the insurance company for me. Right. Nobody else is going to be doing the paperwork, the endless calls. It's not fair. This life isn't fair. And it's not our fault that we have the experiences that we have or the genetics that we have. And what we do with it is up to us. And for me, that's like, I think there's so much hope in that statement. Some people I meet with are like, oh crap, I have another thing to do, right? Like now I have to fix this. I like to think of it in terms of, no, it isn't my fault. It is my responsibility. And there's things that I can do to change, things that I can do to have a different outlook and a different perspective on life.
I think societally, I'll just get on a soapbox here. I think societally, that's such a balanced statement, and we really get in trouble when we fall down at either extreme of that, right? Yeah. When we over-index or over-identify with the hardest parts of our life that are unchosen, that's sort of debilitating and a form of learned helplessness. But then if we're always beating ourselves up for not being where someone else is without any sort of accounting for where our starting line was relative to theirs, I think that's equally defeating and lacking in self-compassion. So I like this awareness of some sort of realities of life that we didn't request and probably wouldn't have chosen. But then pairing that with the personal responsibility, and I think the car wreck is a perfect example. I want to talk about the 3 emotional systems in the book. In the workbook, you introduce these 3 emotional systems that you represent with 3 circles: red, blue, and green. Can you talk to us about what those are and how they interact? And then I got some follow up on that as well.
Yeah, so like simplified, the red is the threat system, and kind of some language that people will know is the fight, flight, or freeze system. And it's really, really helpful for us to have this. These are feelings like anxiety, anger, disgust. They help us. They actually help us out a lot. If I don't know, like if we let venomous snakes go in the room that you are in right now and you had no anxiety response, you're not living very long,
Yeah.
right? And so like this anxiety system helps us to survive. It's like thousands of years of evolution in our brain to help us live. The drive system is resource gathering and thriving. It would be a word that a lot of people might use. So it's gathering resources, having enough that you feel comfortable in living. And then the green system is called the soothing system. And the soothing system usually happens when we're out of danger and when we have enough resources. That's when we typically feel a non-wanting contentment. And the soothing system is the one that is the least developed for most of us. Most of us spend a lot of time getting anxious, and then the anxiety makes us or drives us to do things, and we accomplish something, right? Like we work hard, we put together a great presentation, we help one of our clients, and then we're done. And that feeling doesn't last very long. The feeling of success, like it lasts just long enough to get anxious again and want something more done. And we often get in this loop between the red and the blue, the drive and the threat, where it's like anxious, 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 work, 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 accomplishment, more to do. Let's get anxious about it. Work, 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 get anxious again. And we don't really take time to slow down and be content with what we've done or where we are in life.
What is the basis of that being the least developed? I mean, is it the least evolutionarily necessary? Is it the least societally valued? Like why are we all walking around with sort of withered green circles here?
Yeah. I think a large part of it is like 10,000 years ago, what did we focus on? Having enough food and making sure that we weren't attacked by animals. And once those two things were done, okay, like we're pretty well set to live, right? And to sit and to slow down. But the fast-paced world that we live in today, there's always something new to do. There's always something new to obtain. When my car got in this wreck, I've got an electric skateboard. I didn't even know that was a thing. And now I'm like, how did I not know this? I'm borrowing one from my brother, but now I want one. Yeah. Something that I didn't even know was there. I now need it, right? In my mind, I need it. So there's so much out there to have, so much more to get, so much more to accomplish.
So again, just quick reminder to the listeners, the red is the sort of threat management, stress, anxiety piece. The blue is drivenness and accomplishment, and the green is the self-soothing and the peace and adequacy and enough, right?
Yeah.
So I think, again, I work with financial advisors who, of course, work with, everyday investors. I think about the people that they serve, the people that those advisors serve. Big blue circles, right? There's a part in the workbook where you have people draw out the relative size of each of their circles, right? And I think about the people that our advisors serve, big blue circles, because I mean that's by and large you don't get to the place where you accumulate the kind of wealth and success that you need to work with some of these folks if you're not getting it done. So
right.
Big blue circles. To a greater or lesser extent, a larger or smaller red circle, but plenty of big red circles. But, when I drew my own, right, we'll use me as the guinea pig in this one. It's like big blue circle, big red circle, little green dot, right? So if you get someone like me through the door, or if our advisors get someone like me through the door, highly driven, highly anxious, how do you cultivate an awareness of and the growth of that green circle so there's a little more harmony?
Yeah. Actually, do you care if I'm just going to pull up a quote really quick that I really like? Yeah, sorry. I'm just going to read it off the screen here. It's written by the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama, when asked what surprised him the most about humanity, he said, man, because he sacrifices in health in order to make money. And think about whatever else you might sacrifice, right? Health, family, relation. Okay. Because he sacrifices in health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he is so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he is never going to die. And then he dies never having really lived.
Mm.
I really like this idea of like, what is my life about? What is it that I value? What do I want life to be? My own circles are similar, Daniel, and I'm working to cultivate a greater balance. So I would say, in meeting with somebody who has the shriveled green circles, right? I'm not trying to say that I want you to just sit on your couch and eat bonbons all day. No, that's not you, and it's not who you're going to be. But balance is going to help you make better decisions. It's going to help you have a healthier life. It's going to improve the relationships that you have with people. And for those that say, well, I don't care about relationships, I bet you do. Relationships matter. Relationships are not a luxury item for human beings. If we don't have people around us, we don't survive. From an evolutionary standpoint, we need other people around us. So I would say, in meeting with people, I'm not trying to get rid of the threat. I'm not trying to get rid of the drive. Those are important and actually really, really necessary. We make better decisions when we are in a soothing state. I think about being chased by a bear. That's not the best time to be making decisions. Mm-hmm. And yet a lot of us are making decisions in that system.
I think about the ecosystem where I work in these three sort of emotional valences. The blue one, like I said, is largely present, and it's certainly encouraged, right, by my industry, right? It's like, yeah, keep going, keep pushing.
People will take as much as you're willing to give them, right?
Yeah, keep going. So that one, check. We're sort of wired as a society to value and push on that. The red one, I mean, as an industry, we even have assessments and ways of talking and thinking about that, right? Here's a risk tolerance questionnaire. We're going to measure your propensity to make risk reward trade-offs. We're going to accommodate that with the right portfolio, on and on. We talk about that. The green one is where I think we fall down. And I think it's an opportunity for advisors, the advisors that are listening to this, to spend as much time talking to your clients about the concept of enough as you are talking to them about the concepts of, stay the course, stay calm, and go get them. I think the concept of adequacy and enough, and what does enough look like, so you don't become the person the Dalai Lama's talking about. My guy, Viktor Frankl, has this saying, that evermore today people have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. And I think it's a similar idea that sometimes we're so in that blue circle, accumulating the means, that we forget that green circle. What is enough? What does enough look like?
Well, think about it like this for 1 second, too. If you're constantly between the threat and the drive, the red and the blue, pretty soon we develop an image of ourselves that we should be, right? Somewhere out there's a Derek Griner that has a full head of hair and is just charming and has his life put together perfectly, independently wealthy. And then you've got this guy sitting in front of you. And there's a gap in between those two people, this idealized version of myself. A lot of us end up filling it up with really critical statements. And why, gosh, if you were smart, Derek, you would have done this, or you're going to make that same mistake. Why haven't you figured this out? I say crap to myself I would never say to anybody else. If I think about saying it to somebody else, it's saddening, actually. because it's just mean and cutting. But we use that to drive ourselves to become this idealized version when really we could fill that gap with more compassionate statements of the things that we naturally say to others. Like, hey, keep working. You've got this. I know that you make mistakes, but like, keep trying. As opposed to you jerk. I can't believe you did that again. You're not helping anybody, whatever it is that we feel that way.
So first of all, let me address the most important part of that conversation, which is if you had a full head of hair, you wouldn't look like LA Rams coach Sean McVay. And that would be just every time I watch the Rams, I'm like, it's Derek. No. So for finance, I want to pull on this thread of self-compassion for a minute, because I think there's going to be a very tight relationship between self-compassion and other focused compassion. And there's a degree, I'm guessing, you're the expert, but there's a degree to which I would assume that the one facilitates the other. And I think maybe that's a good place to start, because it's true that a lot of times there's many people in the world who move through the world in a kind and gentle way and are horrific to themselves.
Absolutely.
Right? They move through the world in a very kind way, and they're very tough on themselves. So for the people listening who are in that camp, what's the relationship between self-compassion and the ability to be compassionate to other people in your path?
Yeah, I guess this is kind of the good news, I think, is that we all have the capacity for compassion. It's there. We know how to do it. We know how to do it with others. We're actually very good at doing it with others. If you see somebody on the side of the street and they're hurt, most people pull over and help. I'm sure there's nastiness and there's people that would not do that. But at the core, people are able to help others. And it's a challenge. And it sounds strange to say this, but like being kind and gentle and supportive of ourselves can take practice. It's almost like a garden. Like, you don't go and weed a garden one time at the beginning of the summer and hope that like all of your plants grow well. If you want a garden that's going to produce good fruit, you go out and you cultivate it. You weed it each week. You make sure that you're watering the plants. And it's the same thing with ourselves. And so I think the better we are at being compassionate with ourselves, the more likely we are to feel that picture that you were talking about earlier. We have more to give other people when we have compassion for ourselves. And it's not selfish, or it's not like self-centered to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. We actually benefit others when we have the capacity, a greater capacity, I guess.
I think there's a certain brand of person that maybe at this stage in their development doesn't see themselves as worthy of kindness.
Yeah.
So maybe for that person to say, hey, look, if nothing else, if you're nicer to yourself, it allows you to be nicer to others. So maybe that's the reason you get started. And then along the way, you gain a little more intrinsic motivation. But I think that's an important thing to say. And we're getting towards the end of our time here, Derek. But the workbook that I was working through was really cool because it was full of sort of specific tips and tricks, and the listeners are always looking for something that they could do when sitting down with a client. So if you were to talk to a financial advisor, right, are there any sort of tips or tricks or exercises from your book that you think would be worthwhile for a financial advisor sitting across from a client?
Yeah, and just to make sure I'm understanding right, in terms of interacting with the client or interacting with their own thoughts?
Either one. Yeah, either one.
Yeah, one of the examples that I really like a lot is just this idea of trying to develop an internal voice that has the best interest And maybe the best interest meaning like the least amount of suffering that we can with somebody, whether that be the other person or ourselves. And one of the, this is like, it may be a nice way to illustrate it. Imagine that you're sending a kid, a niece, a nephew, somebody that you care about to a school, and you go to one school and the school, like the principal says, at this school, we know when people make mistakes, and when they do, we catch it. And if they make the same mistake, my gosh, we're on it. If they keep making the same mistakes, we yell at them. And if we have to, we call names and we compare them to other kids in the class. But please know the reason that I'm doing this is I want your kid to improve, and I guarantee they'll get better. I promise you. Then you leave that school and you're like, oh, they're enthusiastic, right? They want improvement. And then you just check out another school for reference and they tell you, like, we're really interested in your kid's development here. And we see mistakes. Like when they happen, we're going to notice them, but we're going to ask your kid what was going on and try and understand their perspective. We're going to listen to what they have to say, and we're going to build on the strengths that they already have. And when we see strengths, we're going to make sure that we note them so that we can build on them. If they make the same mistake over and over, we're going to get creative and do problem solving and help them understand that we're here with them. We don't yell, we don't do comparisons, or if we do comparisons, we're doing it to make sure that the person knows that it's like everybody starts at a different point, and we're going to try and help them compare themselves to themselves. Which of those are you sending your kid to? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? But like, which of those principles do we carry in our minds with us? I have the first one that's like, any little mistake, I'm on it. And I'm like going to compare myself. And it's not helpful. Like, sure, maybe you're successful, but at what cost, right? And if we do that to others, like, what is the cost of that we're doing with others?
Yeah. I love, bringing that framework into client meetings. And, just a reminder for the advisors who are listening, this Accenture study came out last year, and it said the number one thing that clients are looking for from their financial advisor is someone who gets me.
Yeah.
The number one thing is someone who gets me. The number two thing is someone with whom I share values. The things that Dr. Griner has taught us about today are, hugely effective. It's empathy in action. It's the way we get our own minds right so that we can help our clients become all that they're able to become. So, Derek, thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Can I share one other thing really fast?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and this is a personal example, but I remember going to a financial advisor, gosh, it was 12 years ago, and one of our daughters was in need of, we needed to get funding for the daughter. And we went to the financial advisor and gave them all of the numbers. And I remember he said, yeah, you need more money. And I remember thinking like, yeah, like,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do I do that?
Yeah.
And they didn't show very much empathy. They just said like, in your situation, there's not much that we can do. And I think even like, I recognize that there wasn't much that they could do, but the delivery could have made a big difference for me in terms of right now you're in a really hard spot. I recognize that. Let's work to see what we can figure out.
Well, yeah, because you're a grown-up, like you understand that the numbers are the numbers, but the delivery still matters. And
it's like going to, like, if you go to a doctor with a broken arm, like, I don't want to go to a financial advisor either that's like, ooh, that sounds so hard. Oh, you don't have any money. I feel so bad for you, right? If you go to a doctor with a broken arm and all they do is say like, oh, that looks really painful. I'm really, really sorry. That sucks. Yeah. But you don't want a doctor that just snaps it into place and like doesn't say anything either, right? It's this combination of action and empathy.
Empathy and action. I think that's think that's the perfect place to end. Again, to Derek's point, we talked about the number one thing that folks are looking for an advisor. Remember what the research says is the number one thing they fear from an advisor is judgment. And that's what you got, right? I mean, that's what you got was the very reason why people don't present to the office of a financial advisor is they're fearful of being judged. And I think the lessons we've learned today can help us overcome that. So Derek, tell us the name of the book and the workbook and where folks can check it out and find more out about you.
Yeah. So the book is written for clinicians, right? Yeah. But it's called The Compassion Focused Group Therapy for University Counseling Centers, a clinician's guide. So if you're a therapist, that's great. Yeah. If you're wanting to do some of the activities and do some of the visualizations and practices, it's called Compassion Focused Therapy Participant Workbook.
Mm-hmm. That's the one that I went with when I bought
and that's what I would recommend. Yeah.
I would say the same, that it's going to be, you don't need all the theory, but some of the practical pieces could be interesting. Well, Derek, you're doing important work. We appreciate you bringing it to the world of finance and helping us think through how we can apply these things in our own lives and businesses. So thank you so much.
And I want to throw in just one other plug. The Compassionate Mind Foundation by Paul Gilbert is an excellent resource. Okay, just look it up online. And I want to make sure that I am giving credit where credit is due. These ideas, they are not mine. I love them and I'm trying to develop them and further them. But these thoughts and ideas come from Paul Gilbert and all kinds of resources that Paul has. So I just want to make sure that credit where credit's due.
Perfect. A compassionate thing to do. Thank you so much, Derek.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.